So over the years of PlayStation Network, from the start of PS3 to Vita and PS4, one of the most requested features that fans ask for is the ability to change their PSN IDs. Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you why you can't do that, and why that actually might change soon. Hopefully. Now, I'm sure you've clicked on this video just hoping to get an actual answer, and I am going to try and provide that to you, but surely you're looking at the runtime of this video and how long it is, and you're thinking, oh, this is just a bunch of nonsense. I'll give you the answer first, but then we can kind of get into the minutia of, like, the history of this, because there actually is a number of occasions where Sony has acknowledged this and talked about it publicly, and it does get a little interesting, and that will sort of lead up to where we might actually end up seeing this in the future. But to actually give you the reason straight up, and this is the reason that Sony provides to us, funnily enough, this once again goes back to PlayStation 3. We've talked about this on a number of occasions, how Sony has shot themselves in the foot with PS3, not only because of the PS3's cell processor, which makes it complicated to achieve backwards compatibility in future hardware, but this actually is when Sony laid out the groundwork for PlayStation Network. Now, this is the infrastructure that Sony had laid out, and the unfortunate reality is that how they have laid out PlayStation Network back in 2005, 2006, it is apparently much more complicated than it is led to believe. Now, we can't get into the details about it because Sony doesn't provide those details to us. However, they have said on a number of occasions that the engineers at Sony have looked into this. They do know that people want this feature, and just the way that it was built from the ground up, it is not a simple matter of just changing your name. You know, it's not that simple. And the funny thing is, you see so many people over the years request the feature or get mad at Sony and think that there's something insidious going on, but you gotta understand, it's actually widely accepted that people are willing to pay to change their name like once a year, or once every 6 months, or even once a month, assuming that they're paying for it. It's accepted. People are willing to pay money for this, and Sony is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They would love to charge you money for this feature. The fact that they haven't done it and they haven't provided it this long, after knowing that people wanted it and actively looking into how they could make it possible, you kind of have to draw the conclusion that they probably cannot make it happen just as easily as people are expecting it. Now let's get into our history lesson up to the present day of why you might be able to change your PSN ID rather soon. I want to actually start it off with the fact that back in the PS3 days, Japanese PlayStation Network accounts actually worked a little bit different. They used regular PlayStation Network IDs, but in the account management system, you could actually change your display ID. So Sony separated that in the PS3's UI on the XMB. You would still have to add the proper PSN ID if you were going to add a friend or something like that, but once they were on your friends list, or if you were on somebody else's friends list, that active user could change their display name, and that would reflect on the XMB. That was only available for Japanese PSN IDs, and I believe that's been patched nowadays, so you can't even do that. Although realistically, we do have this today now with PS4, just in the veins of using real-life names and connecting a Facebook profile, or just manually using the PlayStation app on your smartphone to change your name that way, or even your profile picture. But that's just displaying, it's not actually changing the ID. Moving on to one of Sony's first public acknowledgments of PSN name changes was Sony Worldwide Studios' Shuhei Yoshida talking to, at the time, IGN's Greg Miller about the PS4's launch, because this came out in 2013, just a few days prior to PS4's launch in North America, where he had this to say in regards to PSN name changes.
Now, you mentioned earlier, why can't we change our PSN names? What's your problem, huh?
Well, that's what the engineers say. That's not, you know, for me or for you or people who are not engineers, we think that there's a cell, right, in your profile.
Right, there's just, an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, delete and rewrite.
Yeah.
You know, that's done, right? It doesn't seem, you know, the system was designed that way. It seems it's a lot of work. Okay. So it's not impossible. It's just a lot of work.
Sure.
And the engineers, the server side engineers guys have to think about, you know, there are lots of new features, you know, we want to put forward, you know, for the PS4 era.
Now, that explanation is the one I gave you earlier in the video, but once again, reiterating, engineers have looked into this. It just doesn't seem to be as easy as we think. Now going into April 2014, where Sony sent out a survey to a number of PlayStation Network users asking about certain features that they'd like to see on PS4, and a number of features like advanced matchmaking or even a reputation system, cross-platform chat between PS3, Vita, and PS4, and sure enough, PlayStation Network name changes are also on there. Now, this is just a survey. These are things that Sony does to gauge user interest to understand what should be prioritized over other features when it comes to updating PS4's firmware for the future. And then just a month later on PlayStation Blog Share, this is actually a place where Sony allows people to submit features that they'd like to see on PlayStation platforms, and then users can upvote or downvote requested features, and Sony has actually put a lot of these features into action, but in May 2014, somebody had requested PlayStation Network name changes, and sure enough, it has 36,000 votes, with 31,000 of those being upvoted. In February of 2015, Adam Cobb on Twitter had asked Sony's Shuhei Yoshida, because of Podcast Beyond's final episode with Greg Miller and Colin Moriarty, if we could get PSN name changes, and he responded with, nope. Very simple no, but it was worth a shot. In October of 2015, Sony's Shuhei Yoshida again was responding to fan questions on PlayStation France's Twitter account. Sure enough, he was asked about PSN name changes, and he provided this video answer.
When? I wish I know. We are all aware that lots of people are asking for the feature, and our engineers have been looking into what they can do. And as soon as we know, we'll let you know. But as of today, we don't even know if we can ever do it. Hopefully, we will be able to provide that feature in the future.
In November 2016, we had a slight ray of hope with Unreal Engine 4. The SDK was updated, and in the patch notes, somebody had noticed that the retrieval of PSN IDs, it appeared as though it might be changing in a way where it could unbind the data to possibly change the display name of PSN, which made it seem like that might be a way that Sony was exploring PSN ID changes. This, of course, was from 2016, so nothing has been heard of since then. Another moment in 2016 was one user on Reddit was complaining about how Sony was handling his PSN ID, because apparently Sony deemed it offensive and they required him to change it, and going over the phone with support and going through multiple people and support tickets, and then the Twitter accounts had gotten a hold of him, and it was a whole mixed scenario up until they came to a solution where they were able to change his PSN ID. However, the resulting change of his ID resulted in a loss of his trophies, friends, digital purchases, and messages. So essentially, he was just given a new PlayStation Network ID, because some people saw this story and were following it closely, hoping that it was actually possible to change your PSN ID, and sure enough, the end result is that, well, no, he just got a new account. He lost everything, basically. They just said that they changed it, but they gave him a new account, more or less, which actually gives us more proof to the fact that Sony just can't change names. They just can't. Not without losing all the progress and trophies and purchases attached to a certain ID. Moving forward to PlayStation Experience 2017, for the first time ever, officially from Sony, we have our small little raindrop of hope that we might get PSN name changes. During an interview with Greg Miller, Sony Interactive Entertainment America President and CEO Shawn Layden had responded once again to the question of name changes, and he was quoted as saying, "I hope we'll see events occur that you won't have to ask me that question next PSX." And from that, we have our last update that happened in February 2018, which was yet another survey sent out to PSN users, specifically asking about PSN IDs and if people were interested in this feature. The questionnaire even goes on to say that you could change your name multiple times for free, but you'd only be able to do it once every 6 months, and if you wanted to go back to your original name, you'd have to contact customer support. So now that we're up to the present day, we can look at those last two events specifically and figure out where we're at right now. At PSX 2017, Shawn Layden said he's hoping that this isn't going to be an issue by PSX next year, and the ironic thing about that is that Shawn recently confirmed that there won't be a PSX 2018. So that's funny, because now a lot of people are looking at that going, you can't give us name changes if there won't be a PSX 2018. To be fair, I don't think he made that comment in 2017 knowing that there won't be a show next year. I'm sure the company made that decision a few months ago, if that, purely based off the fact that they don't have anything to show us. I think they're being honest with that. You can look at E3 2018 for a good example of a disappointing show. They're just going to show us more footage of games that we already know about, because PS4 is at the end of its life cycle. And I'm not saying the PS4 is dead, but it's got 1 to 2 years left of market relevancy. We know that Naughty Dog's doing Last of Us Part 2. We know about Days Gone. We know about Dreams. Somebody like Guerrilla Games, I mean, they're probably doing a PS5 project more than likely, which again, we won't see for 2 years or so whenever they're ready to announce it and whenever we see a PS5, right? There's just nothing to show at press events, so it's understandable why they're not doing a show this year. However, that comment from last year is still extremely important for 2 reasons. One, it tells us that it's still being worked on, much like the survey that was sent out this February. But also, that actually was an indirect timeline of when they are trying to deliver this feature, which is basically about a year. PSX takes place usually in December. We're in September currently, so what I'm saying is that that indirect timeline is actually running out of time, like we might actually see the feature somewhat soon. And a lot of things are just lining up quite well. We also have that comment from the Sony Online Safety team member on Twitter who said that there's more in 6.0 that he can't reveal just yet, and then he had to delete that tweet. So maybe 6.0 actually laid out some major groundwork for this feature being delivered. Of course, 6.0 doesn't have any major features in it, and we even did that firmware comparison video of 6.0 versus 2.5, and you saw faster game installs and a faster run of the UI, but you could also argue that many firmware updates led up to that, and you can't attribute it specifically to 6.0, but perhaps 6.0 did lay out some groundwork. I mean, you can't see it in account management or the PlayStation Store or anything like that, but sometimes it's something that Sony can turn on server side, or perhaps something as simple as a 6.01 update, which is very probable. However, it's also still worth mentioning that comment from 2017, he still wasn't promising anything. He still said he's hoping by PSX next year. He's still reluctant to promise this feature. They've always been reluctant about promising this feature. They say they want to do it, but they don't want to promise it, and I think that's because they are genuine when they say they just don't think they can make this work. But we don't know how many resources they're putting into it. Sure, it's very hard, but how much money and effort are they putting into this? Do they have one guy on it? Do they have a small team on it? We don't exactly know. But one thing is for certain, and that's that Sony understands people want this, and they understand that it needs to be done right, in a way where you keep your trophies, you keep your purchases, you keep your friends lists. Nothing will change, and you could just simply change your name. Sony understands that's very important. Me, I don't need to change my name, but a lot of people need to change their names. It's understandable, right? I mean, you could be a teenager in 2006 making a PSN ID on your PS3, and 12 years later, you are now an adult. We all know that as teenagers, we make a lot of stupid decisions. I understand your pain. So we're going to leave it there for now. I think that's what's important about this conversation, is that we know why it can't be done. We see that they've made some efforts over the years to explain it to people, but those last two events, I think it's a big deal. I think that it might be very soon. We might be on the precipice of getting this feature, and despite the fact that we don't have a PSX 2018, we could still get this announced on the PlayStation blog. We could still see this maybe early 2019. I think we're finally close, and I really hope we are. That's it for me in this video, and if you haven't already, subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates here on YouTube, and I will see you all in my next video. Thank you so much for watching, and you take it easy.